Good evening, folks, or guten Abend, if I got that right. So how many of you actually know Wayfair? Show of hands. Ooh, OK. Well, hopefully at the end of this talk, you'll know a little more. But how many of you actually browse the web for shopping, like on your phone? Web versus, OK, good. You should be knowing Wayfair then. How many of you prefer to use that web experience versus installing an app? OK, so that's good again. So hopefully this talk will be interesting to you. I'm Shrenik Sadalgi. I lead the engineering on a team called Wayfair Next at Wayfair. And we're trying to figure out next generation customer experiences using emerging technologies. Just like any other R&D group at a company, we do a lot of prototyping, we do a lot of research, and we deliver ideas and concepts, nurture them, and help productize them and get them to market. Okay. But for those of you who don't know who Wayfair is at all, we're one of the biggest online retailers of home decor, and we sell over 7 million items. And we actually have a pretty big presence in Europe, especially here in Germany. But what's more interesting is that we're a tech company at the core. Our roots are in engineering. So out of the 5,700 people who work for us, 1,000 of them are actually engineers. And out of those 1,000, 10 of them work on the next team. So we're a tech company, and we're selling home goods, right? But what are we doing at Augmented World Expo? So we've been exploring the potential of 3D for the last 1.5 years as a new medium to provide like the inspiration that our customer needs using great imagery. We're also doing it to create more inviting experiences, more immersive experiences, so that customers can visualize their space and plan their space in virtual reality. But we're also trying to solve customer problems in a more practical way, where we let you see a product to scale in the context of the rest of your space using augmented reality. If you want to know more about the way we use 3D, I'd encourage you to have a look at a talk that I gave earlier at the last AWE. But if you were creating an app, an AR app, a few years ago, you'd most likely be using a pair of AR glasses with pass-through video, tethered to a computer, a Windows computer specifically, and using markers. But for rendering, you'd probably be working with either DirectX or OpenGL, right? You may not be working with them directly, but then you'd be using either a game engine or some kind of SDK to help you out. But if you're hardcore, then you'd probably be using it directly. And for AR, specifically the tracking, you're probably using some marker-based tech. I'm just listing these two here because people can relate to them. And of course, like, your application was probably written in either a game engine or, again, native code. If you fast forward a year or so later with the advent of the smartphone and cameras on smartphones, right? Let's say you were trying to develop an app, an AR app for Android. This is what your stack would look like. And it's most likely a marker-based app, but it could also be markerless. I'm not listing all the markerless technologies here because there's just not enough space. But you'd either be writing this app in Java or Unity. And the app itself, the application layer, is probably tied to the AR SDK. Like, it's very specific, right? But what if you're creating an iOS app? Apple likes to do things their own way, right? So now you're deciding between either Metal or OpenGL or Unity and SceneKit, right? But at this point, you've probably already chosen a good AR SDK that works for you. But then one day, the markers don't excite you anymore, or it doesn't work for your use case. You realize your customer is not actually taking a marker and putting it in their space and like trying to like use it. So because either they're too lazy or they just don't like doing that, right? So, and if you're using markerless, you're probably tired of things just floating away. So Google Tango comes along, and it paves the way for markerless tech using new hardware. And it sets like a high bar for tracking. Now you end up changing your AR SDK because you just love the tracking that Tango provides you. Then Apple releases ARKit, and it works well. It works really well. You can now reach a lot of customers and deliver a very reliable experience. But you may obviously you have to change your AR SDK, you have to figure out how to use ARKit, right? But you may also have to end up switching your application engine from, let's say, if you say you're using Unity to SceneKit, because maybe like Unity is just too heavy for you, or if your app isn't a game, or if it's not a standalone AR app, if AR is just a small part of a bigger app, then it's tough for Unity and SceneKit to play well together. It's Google's turn again, they release ARCore. And that works really, really well again. But you end up changing your AR SDKs. Meanwhile, we wonder what Microsoft's doing. They're probably having some Surface device or supporting some kind of AR, right? And they're probably building it directly into Windows 10 or something. But here we are today. With all of these different kinds of tech, we're trying to create similar experiences for users. But we have to write platform-independent applications specific to either the hardware or the software, which means either the AR SDK or the higher-level game engine. Does this remind you of an earlier time? Maybe the browser was in the late 90s. You had to really work very hard, right, to make your web pages render correctly in either of Netscape or Internet Explorer. But that changed over time because Netscape eventually, well, they had to open source Mozilla. The World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, that was created. And we began standardizing around the web page experience. We had a similar problem with mobile devices. There were so many mobile devices manufacturers that came out, and eventually 2 of them ended up like owning most of the market. Are we going to have that same problem with AR as well? We might, right? How do you actually unite all of these stacks together? So as a developer, I can maintain one code base, still deliver that reliable, consistent experience, independent of the device or the software that runs on it. What's that one cross-platform app that we're so familiar with? The browser, right? You get almost the same experience across a plethora of devices. So if you've identified the browser as the vehicle to deliver your experience, what about the graphics API? If you've noticed in the previous stacks, OpenGL stood out as a very common denominator there. So its derivative, WebGL, should work too, right? And since we're using a browser, what other language should we use apart from JavaScript? JavaScript is probably the most ideal language that you can use for writing all your application logic. But we still have an issue. There's so many different AR SDKs, right? Why can't we take the best out of each, or the most common features out of these SDKs, and abstract that out into something called WebAR? Let's standardize so that app developers don't have to deal with the different AR technologies, so that app developers can focus on the content and the experience. And the most basic version can actually just have 3 basic features, right? So it should just have 6 DOF tracking, a pass-through camera, and a simple understanding of the space. Can I just like measure where the floor is? Can I just detect planes? Is that good enough? So I want to show you a prototype that we built in partnership with Google, who's leading the effort on WebAR. This is running on an experimental version of Chrome. It abstracts out Tango, ARKit, and ARCore. And this particular one is running on Tango, so I'll just show it to you. So this is in a web browser. I draw a little box in my space. As soon as I draw that, I can filter out products that fit that box. So I'm looking for a coffee table. All of these coffee tables fit that box. I can just render that out. This is all happening in the web browser. I can interact with it. So this is using those 3 basic features. That's all it is. But it's such a simple application, and it works well. Here's another use case. Again, this is running on ARKit now. So I'm doing an organic search, like I'm just searching on Google for a particular kind of chair. I'm looking through search results. I like that particular one, so I'm tapping on that. It brings me to Wayfair. And since I know this is running in a browser that's compatible with AR, I show an option there saying View in Room 3D. I tap it. And then it brings up the AR experience. I look around, find a good spot. It's already detecting the floor. Place it there. And that's it, right? So I was able to use an organic search from Google and connect it to my app's experience or my product's experience, right? And that organic search component, like, that's a big source of traffic for a lot of people. This is easier to code. It's faster to prototype because I can change it server side, right? I can just change it on the fly and deliver new experiences every hour, let's say. I get a very consistent experience across a lot of devices. And it's a complete AR experience without having to install anything. And I think this is the way forward. Thank you.